So our next talk will be by Dr. Prateep Nayak. Dr. Nayak is an assistant professor in the School of Environment, Enterprise and Development here at the University of Waterloo. He has a very diverse background in political science and natural resource management. And today he will be talking to us about social-ecological system in crisis, power, politics, and marginalization in Chilika Lagoon, Bay of Bengal in India.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm going to switch a little bit of the gear towards bringing people into the system. I would argue that most of the systems that we keep talking about are human environment systems because there is a human component added to that, and I'm going to focus my talk on that. So as you can see, I'm going to talk about social-ecological systems, which can also be understood as human environment systems. So there is ecological systems and human systems bringing together their efforts to live with this kind of social-ecological system. So I'm going to particularly focus on power, politics, and marginalization that is happening on the east coast of India, which is near the Bay of Bengal, Indian Ocean. So just to give you a little bit of a background, so these social-ecological systems are highly interconnected systems of humans and environment. So people depend on them for livelihoods, for their rights, and for accessing, and cultural values, and all those kind of things. So it's better to understand them as human environment systems. A lot of studies have been done. They see these systems as coupled human environment systems. They see these actions, human actions affect biophysical systems and biophysical factors affecting human well-being. So there is a reciprocity and a feedback system that works between these ecosystems and the human systems. Thereby the argument is that delineation between the two would be artificial and arbitrary. So there is no disconnection that should happen between the human system and the ecosystem itself. Otherwise, addressing only the social dimensions of resource management would lead to an unsustainable pathways, or we would not be able to achieve resilience. If you look at the literature again, in the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, there is a focus and emphasis on relationships between these two systems, or humans and the ecosystem. If you look at the sustainability science, which comes out of the Harvard Kennedy School, they focus on the interaction of people, so relationships by MEA, and then relationships and interactions by Harvard Sustainability Science, particularly from the Sustainability Science group there in the Kennedy School itself. In the last couple of years, I have been working using this interaction and relationships between ecosystems and the human systems. I have been working on connections between these two, which I think is a much more broader term. And it helps you to kind of look at what are the kinds of disconnections that is happening between the ecosystems and the people system itself. With that, I'm going to look at a case study on the east coast of India, where a lot of disconnection has happened in the last couple of decades. And I'm going to give the reasons to that, and I'm going to explain it in detail to you. So this is going to be Chilika Lagoon on the east coast of India, near the Bay of Bengal. One of the largest lagoons, of course, in Asia, and one of the largest in India. And it's a Ramsar site since 1980s, and quite a history in terms of Ramsar putting it on the Montreux list, which is not doing well as a Ramsar site. So they were put in the bad list, and then they brought out the bad list, and then put it on the, they got the Ramsar award in the 1990s. So quite a history in terms of how this wetland conservation has developed in the east coast of India itself. Just a brief snapshot of what it consists of, all sorts of biodiversity. I'm not going to go into details of that. Is the red one the pointer? The red one? Yeah. Okay. So all sorts of biodiversity you see, and it is very famous in terms of not only being a Ramsar site, but the largest migratory bird visiting and habitation place, and Irrawaddy dolphins, which are only seen in a couple of places in the world, and their numbers are less than 1,000 in the entire world. And this lagoon has 150 of them, and so that makes it a very, very rich biodiversity place itself. What I always add to this is that there is almost 500,000 of people who live in and around the lagoon itself. And that makes it a very, very important human environment system because humans interact with the biodiversity that you see on this list itself. However, in the last at least 3 decades, it has gone through tremendous changes because of human impacts, because of policies like globalization, marketization of shrimp aquaculture, and the shrimp price going up in the international market itself. I will give you 2 reasons why these changes have happened in this particular lagoon itself. For the first one is the tiger shrimp, which started to emerge in India in the 1980s, but in the world in the 1970s. Shrimp, tiger shrimp, which didn't have any value in this particular location at least. People used to catch it and dump it because it didn't have any value in the local market, and also it didn't have any value for processing it because it has a lot of meat. So people would not be able to make it into a dry processed fish. So there was no value. After the marketization took place, and the prices of the tiger shrimp went up just from 50 cents to $7 in the 1980s, the trends got up. So everybody wanted to do tiger shrimp, and then something that didn't have any value was started to be defined as pink gold by Kurian, who worked on the southern coast of India. So you could see different kinds of aquaculture that is taking place. Here is a large aquaculture that separates the water body, more of a dike system, more formalized systems of aquaculture that started to emerge in the late 1980s, smaller scale, more intensive ones. So that brought in a lot of contestations in the local areas because these are traditional fisheries. These are caste-based fisheries. So people didn't do anything else other than fishing in the lagoon itself. So when rich, higher caste and rich people came into this lagoon to encroach the customary fishing areas, thereby did tiger prawn cultivation, all the capture fishery sources which were customary and traditionally managed had to, they had to give up, because they lost their access, they lost their livelihoods, and lots of impact started to come. The second factor or the driver that caused a lot of changes is this artificial sea mouth, because coastal lagoons are always connected to the sea, and that's how they maintain their characteristics of being a brackish water lagoon. The fresh water flows from the catchment areas, and the seawater, saline water, comes from the sea, and that's how the unique characteristic of being a lagoon is maintained. As you can see, the natural mouth used to be here, and this is a 28-kilometer channel that used to bring water with high tide and low tide, and then with that flow of water, this used to maintain its character itself. So seamouth usually get closed, and it has to be nurtured, and it has to be maintained. In the 90s, there was a lot of debate about this getting closed, and there was plans to renovate the lagoon mouth itself to maintain the character of the lagoon itself. However, in the 2001, the government, the state government took a decision to give up here and then come and create a new mouth, basically dredged out a new mouth right in front of the lagoon itself here. And that caused a lot of ecological disaster to the lagoon itself, because you can see the 28 kilometers of stretch used to pacify the water flow, and then it will take a gentle turn and get into the lagoon, and thereby the flow and the interaction with the lagoon of the sea was maintained in a natural process. Here, I would give an example. I always keep saying that this worked as a toilet flush. Twice with high tide and low tide, water would come in with a great speed and come out with another great speed. So lots of changes started to happen, much bigger than the impact that it has received from the shrimp aquaculture in the 1980s and 90s. So you could see the seamouth in 2007, the picture, and now it is 5 kilometers wide because seamouth doesn't sit at one place. They keep expanding on the right-hand side always. So there started an emergent culture of encroachment. Higher caste, powerful people supported by the bureaucracy, supported by the politicians, started to capture this lagoon and started to do aquaculture. Lots of policy changes because India adhered to the neoliberal policies in the 1993. And after that, a lot of policy changes in order to create space for aquaculture in this particular lagoon, which used to be a traditionally, customarily managed managed capture fishery source itself. So lots of changes that brought the lagoon to a situation where in practice, because in the 90s, there was, this was challenged in the Supreme Court, which is the federal court in India, and the state high court. And both Supreme Court and the state high court declared shrimp aquaculture illegal. So if you do aquaculture in this lagoon, it is illegal as per the court orders. However, in practice, 60 to 80% of the lagoon area is currently under illegal shrimp aquaculture, and it's very visible. So what happens here? Once that started, we started to see that there is a decrease in actual lease areas. Lease areas are captured fishery lease areas, so thereby you could think in terms of the impact it would have on the livelihoods of the local people itself. So most of the villages that responded to the survey reported that decrease in actual leasing area has taken place in those villages. Those are a number of villages there. Encroachment of fishing area was experienced by a large number of villages, again, significantly large number of villages. So those are trends that show that people are losing their access and rights and their linkages with the lagoon itself because of those drivers. These are traditional institutions which survived because of their, the productivity in the lagoon itself. So fish cooperatives, 122 of them got dysfunctional because there was no fish in the lagoon. And whatever fish was there, they were not allowed to catch it. Number of ecological changes resulted especially from the sea mouth changes. So the disturbance of the salinity regime, the pH factor of the PPT factor of the water itself changed. And think of a brackish water lagoon which changes into a saline water lagoon. What would happen to the species and the biodiversity that we saw in one of the first slides? Changes in the nature of water inflow and outflow because of the location of the mouth itself. So the great speed brings in sand, brings in undesirable elements from the sea itself, and takes away all the silt and and all the required elements in the lagoon itself. So there was lots of sand infestation, which is not good for the lagoon floor and habitations of the species. And invasion of saltwater species was a critical thing that took place also. I'll give you some examples. Barnacles, which you've never seen in the lagoon, started to be seen in huge amounts. Once barnacles are the lagoon is infested with barnacles, it is hard to operate, as fishers. Fishers walk into the lagoon, they have to stand in the lagoon water, but these are surf, so they can create deep cut wound on the feet of the lagoon. So you cannot operate if it is infested with barnacles, and they can infest your instruments, everything virtually. So it became very, very unfriendly for fishers to operate as small scale fishers in the lagoon itself. I said a lot of undesirable things not to be seen in the lagoon in large quantities at least. So they started to come in, thereby what people call the sea creatures were started to figure very prominently in the lagoon itself, and there are incidents where people are attacked by stingrays or octopus. And however, the biggest change because of these two drivers that we started to see in the late 2000s was this increase in the variability, uncertainty, and unpredictability of the processes associated with the lagoon itself. So it became so unpredictable. And I'm going to give you some examples of how the uncertainty and unpredictability started to increase in the lagoon itself, thereby what it could have done to the people in the lagoon itself. This is the red Indian shrimp, which comes in the month of February. This is white Indian shrimp, which comes in the month of May, end of May. I was traveling on a boat one day in 2009, and you started to see them both together. From a production point of view, it is good because you are getting all sorts of varieties here. However, people get worried because this signifies of a bigger, problem or trouble in the future itself. People do not have a clue what's happening here ecologically. That these two, which used to maintain a 3 months distance from each other in terms of their seasonality, have started to arrive at the same time. So these are indications that there is something severely going wrong in the lagoon itself. We do not know whether it is for the seamouth changes or it is for the aquaculture, but there are something that is causing these changes and which is not good for the health of the lagoon and the health of the people itself. Species seasonality started to get disturbed. So, for example, there's sudden abundance of certain species. So people do not know which species is going to be abundant in a particular or given season itself. Fish habitat in some of the villages were reported to become crab habitats. So that indicates the biophysical changes in the lagoon itself, why a fish habitat would turn into a crab habitat. So there are ecological reasons of this taking place itself. As a social scientist, and I went there as a PhD student in the 2006, and it is not physically possible to create alternate data sets to say how much people are catching or not catching, because it's 150 villages and 500,000 people. So we started to do some simple work through photo documentation. So we went to the lagoon through the help of a number of community researchers that were working with me during my 2 years field work there, and I continue to work there until now. In fact, 2 of my students are going there this summer to do their research. So we started to catch, take a glimpse of what's happening, what people are catching itself. People used to bring boatloads of fish home. Now you see what they bring every day from the lagoon itself. So there were hundreds of pictures that we took on a day-to-day basis to find out what people are catching. And this is a rolled up fishing net. If you open it up, it can catch up to 150 kilograms of fish in it. And you can see when they lift it from the lagoon what they catch. So these are severe indications that the fish production or the fish availability, fish stock has gone really, really drastically down in that particular lagoon, and these are indications of that. Okay. We started to catch what the fish traders are collecting. So if there is fish in the lagoon, then it has to go to the market. So the only channel from these remote villages to go to the market is through the fish buyers, the small fish buyers or fish traders at the village level itself. So we started to get their daily records. So you can see one fish buyer collects only 4 kilograms, 300 grams of fish. He must be collecting from a number of people itself. So we did that documentation over a number of days. This is mostly from 2007, but this gives us a good idea about whether there is fish, what are the impacts, where it is going, and how much people are collecting. We then went to the fish traders and tried to dig records, historical records of, this is 15 years of fish collection record from this particular gentleman who agreed to give his records to me. So we collected that to see the trend in terms of fish availability in the lagoon itself. And of course, we bought a number of calculators and sat with a number of people to calculate what has happened in the 15 years in terms of fish collection from the lagoon itself. And we found there is a drastic decrease in the amount of fish that was there in that was collected 15 years before, and that is now being collected. So this is an evidence that gives a historical trend of gradual decrease in fish availability, thereby signifies ecological changes in the lagoon itself, because fish would not go down, fish stock would not go down unless there is a change in the lagoon ecosystem itself. We looked at households in these 2 villages. We found staggering numbers of households experiencing unimaginable things, food shortage to, depending to start live on loans and all sorts of paying all sorts of exorbitant interest rates and getting into a trap of poverty, getting into a trap of exploitation and marginalization there. Then we found out what people are doing to cope. So you can see a series of activities people do to cope. That includes not sending their children to school because there is no economic avenues, to selling off their boats and mortgages and a series of things too, which doesn't give us a good picture of the social ecological system that I'm talking about. Huge large-scale migration, 24,000 people in 2009. Which constitutes 1/3 of the adult fishers, so displaced from the lagoon itself by migrating to urban centers in search of livelihoods. So this graph tells us how many villages experienced migration from their village for the first time in this given years. So in 1981, 1 village only experienced. So if we link it to the 2 drivers that I talked about, this is an intense phase of tiger shrimp cultivation. So you can see how the number of villages experiencing out-migration has gone up during this time, and that is correlated to the activities of shrimp aquaculture. And you can see that the number of villages experiencing out-migration going further up here, and that is correlated to the seamouth itself and the kind of impact seamouth had on the social ecological system. And if by the time we reach 2008, if you add up all these villages, these are the total number of villages. So there was not a single village who didn't have experienced migration by 2008. And these are large-scale migration to urban cities where they end up in doing menial jobs such as construction laborers, which they had never done in their lives. Okay, the politics here is, if you go into the government records, what do you see? The government record says 1996, 2002, 2001 was the year when they opened up the new seamouth. So thereby, the report says there is a 5-fold increase in fish and 10-fold increase in shrimp, 16-fold increase in crab, and annual household income increase from just $70 in 1996 to $1,200 in any person with a common sense would not believe these figures. And that brings the intense politics that is being played in terms of different players bringing in their say and their narratives to the story of the social ecological system of the lagoon itself. At the same time, reading that data, you move into the villages, you find endless stories of deprivation and marginalization being told by the fishers, and we saw some glimpses of that through my slides. We asked through a larger survey to 140 villages, 150 villages actually. So these are the villages which responded to the survey, which tells us that almost all villages agree that they have been disconnected from the lagoon itself, physically, mentally, culturally, and economically. So there is a large-scale disconnection that has happened as agreed upon by the villagers in the lagoon itself. However, the paradox, which is the gap between the official account and the local fishers' view of the situation itself, signifies the power disparities and intense politics. And remember, this is a caste system. Higher caste and lower caste dynamics are very, very severe. And mostly higher caste is they represent in the bureaucracy and the political decision-making circles itself. Of course, being the land of Gandhi, there has been massive protest movements in the history, and thereby that continues. So this is one of the movements which talks about fishing is a lifelong movement, rights to life and livelihoods, and people protest against not being displaced. So if you look at the lagoon as a social ecological system, which is really complex, as I have shown you. So there are different things here which is going on in terms of the power politics and marginalization, in terms of environmental change, in terms of what people experience in the lagoon itself. I try to put that into a conceptual framework here for you. So there is environmental change, as you could see, plenty of environmental change going on. We saw that there is a human-environment disconnection that is rampant. We saw there is a social ecological marginalization because people are being marginalized ecologically and socially, and of course, from other aspects. Where is the starting point? So there are multiple starting points here. In certain contexts, it could start from one of these and make a circle. So we do not know where it starts. It could start from human-environment system, thereby, make a circle. It could start from environmental change and make a circle that way. Sorry, the directions are not well, but So it's a kind of a feedback system. So it could start from some kind of disconnection, thereby make the full circle, or it could start from some kind of environmental change, thereby lead to disconnection and thereby marginalization itself. And as we saw, at least two drivers in this particular case. There are multiple drivers that impact from different scales, from the global to the local scale. Policy changes, market price for shrimp that affects such local conditions. So there are different kinds of impact that comes, and we saw two impacts here: the seamouth and the shrimp aquaculture itself. So in some of my previous work, we have tried to look at this disconnection, thereby try to define it as the physical, psychological, economic, and political separation of people from their environment. In this case, in this particular case, Chilika Lagoon, that may result from loss of ecological capital, loss of access and tenure rights, loss of livelihoods, out-migration, and loss of environmental knowledge and sense of stewardship. It's basically includes everything that people in the lagoon can possibly link to their existence. Okay, I will end with a couple of slides. So in 2009, when I was there, I got a phone call, and one of the villagers started they made a phone call to ask me my advice whether they are going to accept goats from the government or not. So there was a social development program where the government was trying to give them goats. And we had intense discussion. This particular village rejected the idea of taking goats, because the idea was, what are the fishers living on an island going to do with goats? Okay. However, this signifies, this gives us a trend of marginalization, trend of the kind of politics that is being played and that will be played in the future itself. So there is a threat that goats will replace the fish, and thereby the fishers will no longer be fishers, and thereby it's easier to take over their land, their fishing areas and convert it into something else. Ecotourism is a big thing since especially after 2001, because people come to see Irrawaddy dolphins, people come to see the seamouth without knowing the kind of impacts the seamouth has on the local people itself. So you see large numbers of tourist boats now compared to the fishing boat. There's a threat and there's a trend that tells us that the tourist boats will outnumber the fishing boats, and that's a trend that tells the story of marginalization for me. These are women belonging to a particular caste. They go to knee-deep water, bend down in the water and pick shrimp from the mud. And they do that for 3 hours or 4 hours a day, pick 2 kilograms or 4 kilograms of fish or shrimp, and then they sell it in the market and they make their livelihood out of that. And you could see a number of traditional fishing gears. This was a crab trap. At the same time, these gears would support a really vibrant capture fishery system in the lagoon itself. At the same time, you see a number of shrimp aquaculture farms being developed. So thereby, the trend is capture fishing will be lost to aquaculture, and thereby the implications will be on the ecosystem and the human environmental system itself. In 2008 and 2009, we went to several villages, and you find that the fishing gears are stacked up like this in several villages, which means people are no more fishing. Either they have migrated out or they are not doing fishing anymore. Thereby, if they have migrated out, the question is where are they, and probably they have ended up in a larger city as migrant laborers. So the absent fishers and their numbers are multiplying day by day, and this is a trend of marginalization again. This is one of my study villages, Berhampur, and looks like a happy group, but they were actually having a meeting to discuss where they are going to migrate after the Durga Puja festival, which was a bigger festival. And after the festival, they were all planning to migrate as a group to Hyderabad and Chennai. And then you walk into the village. I was invited to this marriage, which was taking place as a photographer, of course, because I had a camera at that time. And then I had a discussion with the groom, and I found that the guy who was just getting married was going to join that group and going out with the group, leaving the bride back at home. So homemakers become migrant laborers, and this is another trend of marginalization in a social-ecological context, in a human environment context itself. This road was built, a 3.2 kilometer road was built right through the lagoon, one of the channels of the lagoon itself, to one of the higher caste villages itself. And this was done under the Prime Minister's, that translates to Prime Minister's road program or something, okay? And it was done through that federal program, which divides the lagoon into two, So this is a smaller part. And last year I was there, this has dried up, this has been encroached, So the wetland has dried up basically because there is no connectivity with the main lagoon here. Thereby, there is a planned disintegration of social ecological base itself, thereby, the implications should be really, really harsh. Looking at the people itself, what do you do? We see the trends suggest that not just excluding but eliminating the real people, which are the fishers for me, You're just eliminating them from the scene itself, thereby eliminating them to the extent that you don't see the poor. So I mean, I'm sorry, but this signifies the kind of situation it is there. So you start to eliminate them, and then thereby they become invisible. Thereby, the lagoon could be put to different kinds of uses itself. This is a very, very unusual scene for me, having known the local culture. This is a kitchen, so this is not going to be empty and deserted like this. The fact that it's so clean, the fact that there is nothing boiling on this wooden stove signifies that this household is not cooking food anymore, or not cooking food regularly. Otherwise, you'll find a pot of milk, pot of rice boiling, children eating, and some activity going on around this space. You walk half a kilometer. When you see this wooden stove of the poor not regularly functional, you walk just half a kilometer. You find, in the name of ecotourism, floating restaurants. You pay $50, you get a sumptuous meal, and you will be treated and pampered fully. Okay, and I would end there in terms of I was not trying to give any answers. I was just trying to sketch a story of marginalization, story of human environment disconnection here. So I would stop here by asking a question to myself and to everyone, and I have asked this in many forums: where do you go from here? What do you do as academics? What do we do as policymakers? What do we do as activists? Thank you. So do you have time for questions? Sorry.
Thank you very much. I just want to make a quick note about why I'm holding this seemingly pointless microphone. It's for the live feed. So we have time for one or two quick questions. So I will bring this microphone to you. Questions?
So you said there's about 500,000 people living kind of around the lagoon. So I assume that's a much larger population than the fishermen population in the lagoon. So to what extent are activities in the hinterland, so in the catchment area, also causing changes, ecological changes? You identified two major drivers, but is there a land-based driver also? Are there changes, economic and social changes, in the hinterland that are also causing change in the lagoon itself?
It is, yes. I showed you on one of the maps. I showed you the catchment area, and it's the Eastern Ghats mountain ranges, which has been degraded in the last 4 decades at least. Massive degradation, cutting down of forests, and that has a dent, because 50 rivers and rivulets that fall into that bring fresh water to the lagoon bring a lot of silt now, and that degradation has a direct impact on the lagoon. And then there are the farming communities, and then the farming practices have gone up, intensive agriculture, use of chemical fertilizers, and all sorts of things. So that has a dent on the lagoon ecosystem itself. So yes.
Really nice talk. I had a question in terms of, so you reported the government numbers for how much increase in wealth. So if you looked at the wealth segregated by higher caste versus lower caste, is it possible that you would see an increasing trend for the higher caste and a decreasing trend for the lower caste?
No, there are no higher castes which are involved in fishing. It is only the lower caste, constitutionally, defined scheduled tribes, which are the fisher groups, So the higher castes are basically farmers or business persons, So they don't do fishing. In fact, a couple of decades before, if a higher caste person gets involved in fishing, he would be ostracized from the society itself. But now the trends have changed because people would like to get involved in aquaculture, which is not seen as fishing.
Okay, so the higher castes are involved in the agriculture that is actually...
Mostly, yes.
Related, so in terms of irrigation, is heavier irrigation decreasing? So on one hand, you have the salt water increase because of the new mound, and is it possible that the freshwater inflow has been decreasing because of heavier irrigation?
It is, yeah, it has decreased, yeah. Lots of channels and the feeder rivers, have been blocked now, so the inflow of freshwater has really decreased, but after the new seamouth, the inflow of saline water from the Bay of Bengal has increased. So that kind of caused a disbalance in the system itself.
Thank you so much.
Goodness. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.